Welcome to another episode of Artist Spotlight, the podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Mitch Stringer. And again, we are brought to you through our alliance with the Maryland Photography Alliance, where you can get all sorts of good information on photography and events and photo walks, and just a really good place to check out when you get time to see what's going on in the photo community, whether you're in the Maryland area or nationally or worldwide. There's just good information available for everybody, and that's available at mdphotoalliance.org. Well, my guest this episode is someone who I've really been looking forward to talking with. And while that is generally the case with the photographers I've had as guests on the show, Cheriss May is practically my neighbor, me being in Maryland, she being Washington, D.C. based. And many people, and I say many, probably 8 or 9 people over the past year, 18 months have said, why don't you talk to Cheriss May? And
Really?
I thought, yeah, and I thought, well, why don't you? So, with no further ado, let me welcome Cheriss May to the podcast. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Mitch. Happy to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me as well, as well. So, I was taking a look at a quote of yours that was visual storytelling is my passion and my purpose. And, on
Hmm.
the surface, I can read that and think I know what that means, but if you kind of go a level or two or more deeper, I think it is deeper. It's more than composing an image and making sure your shutter speed, your f-stop is right, and all those very sort of clinical things. It's a deeper feeling that you probably walk out of the house with when you go on a shoot. You probably think about when you look back at your images and see, did I capture things in a way that I intended? What does that quote of yours mean to you, sort of on a deeper level?
Hmm. Yeah, it is much deeper. It is for me, it started out like photography for me started out as a childhood curiosity, and then it became a hobby, and then it became a serious hobby, and then it became a profession because I didn't start out in photography. And from there, as I was doing the work, as I was like deeply involved in doing the work and doing different things, it became more of a feeling of purpose to me. And for me, the purpose is the connections I make with people. So when if I'm on assignment or if I've been commissioned to do a portrait, for me, it's more so about making that authentic connection with that person and being able to show who that person is authentically, without them coming with a representative of themselves, but feeling comfortable enough to relax into who they truly are, which I think, in my opinion, that is reflected in the image or images, that you actually made a connection with someone so that it feels like you're, genuinely seeing this person, without them putting on something that they think people want to see,
Mm-hmm.
but more so being like, here I am, this is me, and presenting that to the public. So for me, it's much more than the assignment, it's much more than a commission, but it's the connection I make with the people. And a lot of times I stay in touch with the people. I may have just met them that first time for the photo, hadn't met them before, just met them in that moment, but we actually become connected in a way. And I think that's how life is anyway, that, sometimes you just connect with people and it becomes like a part of the fabric of your life. And it just, continues from there. So, sometimes I'll make connection with a person on assignment and they'll reach out to me if there's a story. They're like, "Oh, I thought about you. There's this interesting story. My neighbor this, or, this is going on, or we're doing this." So it could be like that, or um the person may, you know, want to connect later, or um just have a conversation about something. And I'll give you one example of another reason why I say purpose, like finding my purpose from the passion. So I was working on this campaign for the NAACP one year. And so they had me, I was taking these portraits of people, what they called like power portraits. And a lot of times when you sit people in front of a camera, you put them in front of a backdrop with lights and everything, people get nervous or, they're kind of the anxiety kicks up and, it's an uncomfortableness. But I think really what it does is the light is shown on that person and puts them in the spotlight, and people are really vulnerable in that space. So there was a lady who, so I set up this mobile studio. It was at the convention center, the Washington, D.C. Convention Center. And I set up this mobile studio. I had a backdrop, I had a couple lights, and people would come in, I would pose them and take these power portraits. And so a lady who worked there, she was cleaning. And so she came by and she saw the setup and she's looking, she was like, wow, what is this? What's going on? So I explained it to her and she said, I don't take good pictures. And I was like, you know what? I said, usually the people who say they don't take good pictures take the best pictures. And I said, come back and I said, how long are you working? And so she told me like when she was finished. I said, come back when you finish. I'll still be here. I'm gonna take your power. I'm gonna do a power portrait of you. And she was like, really? And I was like, yeah, come back. Seriously. She came back. And so I put her in there. At first she was nervous. I just talked to her. I posed her and created this portrait. And so I was shooting tethered. So you could see the images on my computer, as they were coming up. And so I invited her over to come look at these images of her. And she just started crying.
Oh,
And she was like, oh my God, like I've never seen myself like that before. And she gave me a hug and she was like, thank you so much. I got her email, I sent her, the images. But yeah, just to show people their beauty, their power. And I told her, I was like, look, she was like, oh my God, you're amazing. Cause I was like, no, you're amazing because this is only a reflection of who you are.
mhm.
So
Yeah.
I just know in those moments, you just never know how much you may like help someone to realize their voice. And so for me, like moments like that, I know like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Isn't it interesting how no matter who you are, no matter what walk of life, no matter really anything, um, we all see ourselves from the inside out while everyone
Mm-hmm.
else sees us from the outside in. And I think many of us, if not all of us, can be our own worst critics. We can be the
Mm-hmm.
toughest on ourselves. So, you doing that, um, she clearly had curiosity because she came back
Mm-hmm.
and you gave her that opportunity to even choose to come back, and she was taking a risk in a sense by
Yeah.
doing that, and
Yeah.
and you made it feel like a safe place, and without kind of overstating it, you sharing those images with her could have well had a profound going forward impact on how she
Mm.
saw herself.
Right. That was the hope. And
Yeah,
in that moment, that's what I felt she was, sharing with me and communicating with me that, okay, like I said, now you can stop saying I take bad pictures.
exactly.
No, no, you don't.
So you bring up something interesting, not only with her but also with some of the people that you're doing the portraits, the power portraits of, and that's a subject of rapport.
Hmm.
And I've spoken with a number of photographers over the years, whether they're portrait photographers or I'll do this in quotes, celebrity photographers, or where and in my world of sports photography, I've been asked to shoot magazine covers of different athletes, and the
Hmm.
athlete is either about to go practice, they just finished practice, they're about to play in a game, and having their picture taken, I can't say it's at the bottom of their priorities. What I can say is it hasn't even made the list of priorities, let alone the bottom. And so, when you have, you know 3 minutes, 5 minutes, or an hour to make a portrait, especially if the subject is being compensated for that portrait, and then
Hmm.
they'll be there as long as they're being paid to be. But maybe you can kind of share your experiences with building rapport. Clearly, in that one example, very quickly you built rapport. But
Hmm.
sometimes when people, especially, sort of known people, let's say that, whether it's in the business world, political world, or elsewhere, they're used to kind of seeing people one after the other, after the other, after the other. And they may feel like I've got this other big thing today, but I've got these small things I just have to knock out before that
Hmm.
big thing. So, how do you kind of get them to be present so you can accomplish what you need to?
Hmm. And you're right. I know you understand in the work that you do that sometimes you have 3 minutes, sometimes you may have an hour. And so whether it's 3 minutes or an hour, you still have to make that connection and build that rapport because they're going to have to like really trust you in order for them to really be vulnerable uh, for their, for this portrait. And so for me, that is like one of the important things that I think about before I, am in front of someone to create their portrait. I what I found, Mitch, honestly, like what it is, like the secret, if you want to call it like a secret, is to be yourself. People can feel that. And that's what I've, found out through working with different people is they really feel if you're being genuine or if you're putting on,
Mm-hmm.
in that. And what I find is no matter if it's a quote unquote everyday person or a celebrity, it's the same in both of those instances. Like, be yourself. I think sometimes people think like if you're in front of a certain like celebrity that you're supposed to act a certain way or you put them treat them, a certain way because in that in as you know like shooting someone who has some public attention that there are a lot of handlers around and people who are running around and they kind of set that kind of mood of catering or you gotta like oh my god we gotta walk on the eggshells and all the things but for me my experience has been that if you're the same whether in that instance or in somebody who's in the community who isn't in the public light it's the same you just the key is to be your authentic self and just have a conversation with the person. I think sometimes like people aren't used to people just being um nice and just introducing yourself and just genuinely saying like how have you been doing? How's your day? How's it been going? Just like everyday human things that
Mm-hmm.
we crave, that interaction with other people. And I can tell when people really don't get that, like people don't ask them how they're doing, or how was their day, how's it going. You can tell because they're like kind of shocked, like, oh, okay, like we're doing this, okay, like
Yeah.
yeah. Um, and I'm a hugger too, so I will go in and like hug people, and then sometimes people are like, "Can I get another hug? I needed that. I needed that."
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so I've had that too. Like I remember this one lady, she was like, I went in for the hug. She's like, "Oh, we're doing that? Okay." And she was kind of like, "Okay." But then like after I did it, she was like, "Can I have another one?" Like I really
Oh,
needed that. I really needed that. So I think, in everything, life is hard as it is. and you just never know what people are going through, what things that they may be struggling with or battling with or challenges they may be having at the time. So just a kind word goes a long way. And I think it also just makes people relax, and then they're like, okay. Um, some people in building that rapport, like if this is the first time you meeting them, if it's like commission portraits, then it's like showing them the back of your camera. Like you do something, show them the back of the camera, and then they're like, okay, yeah, yeah, I like that, or whatever. And then they're like, okay, just tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. And they just kind of, open up from there. It's like, okay, now we can, I can tell them things. Sometimes people may be resistant in how you're posing them. I'm sure you've probably experienced that as well. But you'll get like kind of a resistance, and it's like you're like, trust me, it'll be okay. So then when you show them, they're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I'll whatever you say, whatever you say, I'm gonna do. Um, Another thing is, if you have the opportunity to have a conversation with a person before you meet them on the day of the shoot, that's always good too. And I try to do that if I don't have, you can't do it all the time, but
Yeah.
I do ask to do that, to have this conversation, because trying to not make our first time meeting when we meet to do these photos. So if I can have that conversation, then it feels like once we meet that we know each other a little bit more. I've been able to have a conversation with you with me, and I just want to make sure that you're comfortable and that you have all you need. And then even giving some tips and preparation, for that day. And I'm here if you have any questions, that kind of thing. Just kind of opening that door, um, to be someone that they can feel comfortable with. And so, that's my thing. Try to speak to them prior to the shoot. But if you can't, when you go in, just, be kind. Be
Mhm.
kind, in that space, in that moment. Be yourself. Communicate as you communicate. Don't try to do it like someone else. I had someone ask me some time ago, and this was like during the time of 2020 and COVID, and we were doing all these Zooms, and there were a lot of like talks people were doing,
Mhm.
during that time, because no one was leaving their house. And so I did a number of talks, and I just remember someone asking me, like, can you help me to um, get better in doing talks? Because I have some talks coming up, and I'm, just want some tips, and how can I? And then they were like, I want to talk like you. And I said, well, that's the problem. That's your problem, and that's why that won't work for you, because you have to talk like you. It has to be who you are. It has to be your voice. And so that's what you need to, bring out is you in that. Don't try to talk like someone else. That will that will never work. And so I think that, it happens a lot. Social media is really good for kind of growing that kind of sentiment, because you see people online and you're like, oh, I wish I, you know, had assignments or clients, or if you like this photographer over here, oh, I want to do what this photographer is doing. And I'm not saying that to say it's wrong to admire, what another photographer is doing, just as long as you're not trying to be exactly like that person. Like it has to be authentic to you. So it's nothing wrong with saying, like, I aspire to do that work, but just don't lose yourself in that trying to be someone else.
It's interesting that you bring that up. I've spoken with face to face, and I've reached out to and corresponded with a number of photographers, some very well known, some lesser known, but very, very talented. And one of the types of feedback that I get a lot from really super talented people is I appreciate being asked to be on the podcast. I just don't feel comfortable with public speaking.
Hmm.
And of course I respect anybody's choice to do whatever, whatever they want to do. But I think to myself, number one, what an opportunity that unfortunately listeners won't be able to hear this person and come to find more and more about their work and the personality that's creating that work. But then I think about the photographer themselves, and I think, if you are an artist and you want to get your work out, you really do yourself a disservice to, you don't have to be born with it, but just to take
Hmm.
incremental steps to
Hmm.
to we can't all let our work speak for itself, because people, like you said, you're building rapport, and someone may like somebody's work, but if they connect with that artist as a human, not just the work they're
Right.
producing, then it just evolves them so much further. But yeah, you may or may not be surprised, and it's probably not different than the general population, how many
Mhm.
photographers, they're just not comfortable with
Oh
public
yeah.
speaking.
I know some
Yeah.
amazing photographers who are incredibly talented, but they're not comfortable in that seat. But
Hmm.
I will say, like, I was not always at this place. I was one who was extremely shy. And there was a time in my life where I would not feel comfortable having this conversation with you,
Okay.
whether, virtually or in person, especially not in person. Um, I think that was a time where I was still unsure of myself
Okay.
and I didn't really feel the purpose yet. And, you had said this earlier that a lot of times we are our own, our worst critics and things like that. And we are. Like, I think we some a lot of times build so much internally that it prevents us from doing things like this. It prevents us from speaking because we built up in our head, like, no one wants to hear me, or, I'm not going to be able to, do a good job, speaking, and I'm uncomfortable, I'm awkward, all the things. Um, the thing that I also told this person who asked me to, for some tips and guidance is that you have to keep doing it. And for me, that's what it was. And you have to do it scared. So that's how I broke, out of that is I started to do it scared. Like I was petrified. As someone who was always in the background, extremely shy, didn't want that attention. I just had to say, okay, like you can do this. I know you're scared, all the things. And I just had to do it scared. And what I realized is in going out there and doing it scared, that I was building so much up that wasn't even there. These were things that were holding me back that were not roadblocks. They were just something internally that I was putting on myself. And so that's what I discovered. And then, from there, I was just like, you know, even if someone rejects me or what I say, then they reject it. Like, there's nothing I can do about that, but I'm going to keep, moving forward and keep doing those things that I know that I'm purpose to do, but also those things that I really enjoy doing, I really love doing. And I think that's what it's about is that we're able to each individually, we have things that, we're really passionate about and things that we love doing. So I wanted to keep doing that. So, in going through the doing it scared, then I discovered that, it's okay. There are going to be no's. I'm not going to get every opportunity. Um, every shoot is not going to be the best, even, I'm not going to connect with everyone. I may be able to connect with some people, but some people just, or maybe it's an off day. And that's the thing too, I think people don't think about is sometimes you just catch people on an off day. You catch people when, maybe there's a lot going on in their life. And so that is like weighing heavy on them. So they can't relax to, really open up. So a lot of times we think it's something that we did or something within us that's, not doing that, but you just don't know what's going on, on the other side of the camera. So,
I've always felt that whether a person is innately shy or maybe a little introverted or a little scared, that photography and specifically the camera, it's like a passport to go places and do things. And, I mean, obviously a camera is not a huge thing, but it's almost like looked at both from a good standpoint and maybe not so good. You can hide behind the camera, and that's probably not bad if that's what you need to push forward. And then incrementally, you kind of lower that camera
hmm
because, but the camera's what sort of got you to go there and do it.
hmm
And I really I always say that a camera is a passport to explore.
it is. It is. I agree. And that's one of the things for me in my practice of someone who was this shy person that if I was in a social setting, say I'm at a networking reception or, something, I would be the person that's just kind of off to themselves and, like, but in my head, I'm saying, okay, Cheriss, just go over there, introduce yourself, say hi, all the things. I can't, I just couldn't move my feet, to do that. So for me, as I got deeper into photography, I had to lower that camera. And I had to, if my goal is to have images or create images that people will feel something when they're looking at it, then I knew that I had to lower that camera and to get out there more. So you're right. The camera was like that conduit to making that introduction and getting me out there and speaking to people and shaking hands and getting to know them. It definitely did open a lot of doors for me in terms of coming out of my shell, in that. So I definitely agree with you on that.
Using that metaphor of moving your feet. So you're born in Kansas City, Missouri,
Missouri.
and you eventually make your way to Washington. And you mentioned as a kid, you kind of picked up photography. So, I'm sure people who are listening are thinking, wow, okay, so Kansas City, Washington, she's here, she's
hmm
there. What was it that moved you, like I guess literally and figuratively, from the Midwest to
hmm
now the East
Yeah.
Coast and
Yeah.
and pick up photography along then? When did you first put a camera in your hand and think, huh, I want to see what
Yeah.
this thing can do?
Right. So I'll start kind of backwards from, what you said from the beginning. My uh, journey into photography and discovering that was, I think I was around 7 years old. And my mom was a business school teacher in high school, but she was also the advisor for the yearbook for school. So in that, she got a camera and she brought this camera home. And I just remember as a little kid seeing this camera come in, opening the bag, like, oh, what is this? So I asked her if I could play with it, and she said, yeah. So I started to just kind of childhood clumsy curiosity playing with the camera. And I became this kind of unofficial, official family photographer that would show up at all these family events, birthdays, holidays with this camera. And, I'm just the little kid, in your face taking these pictures. And then I would get so excited. It was a film camera. So I would get so excited to um, drop the film off and then have my parents take me to go pick the film up. And then I'm, scanning through the photos. And then the next family event that we had, I would come and spread a cloth on this table, and I would like lay out all the photos, so the
Wow.
family could like look at them. And for me, it was seeing the joy of my family, like going through the photos, like, oh my God, look at this. Oh, look at you. Oh. And I think in that, what they didn't realize they were doing was encouraging me to explore further and to do it more because I just like seeing them happy, in that. So I just kept doing it. And, it becomes a thing of they're like, oh, you're going to bring your camera and, all these things. And then my parents, I guess they saw something there. And what they started doing was buying me a camera like every Christmas. They would upgrade my camera. I would get like a better camera each Christmas, as I was growing, in that. And they saw that, I had this interest. Um, but for me, still, I didn't look at photography as a career. So I knew I wanted to do something creative. I always had this like kind of drive to whether it was like drawing or I'm coloring as a kid, just something creative. I love music and I just knew that, I wanted to do something, but I didn't photography was this thing that I had that I really enjoyed doing, but I didn't look at it like, oh yeah, I want to be a photographer. So I went into graphic design. I pursued graphic design. So from Kansas City, I was accepted to and decided to go to my number one choice school, Howard University, HU, in Washington. That brought me to Washington, D.C. And I came to Howard. I actually was in the School of Communications. I was an advertising major, but my program was under the journalism department, so I had to take some journalism courses, which I hadn't taken in high school. And I took photography as an elective. So I took two classes of photography, and for me, I thought it was going to be this thing like, oh, I'll just go out and take some pictures, have fun. This is a fun class or whatever. And don't get me wrong, it was fun, but the professor was like really strict. And so we got into things like rule of thirds and, perspective, all these things that I never like knew about because that wasn't something that I pursued. It was just something fun that I was
Hmm.
doing. And so I got into the dark room and, we had part of that class where I had to develop and all the things and learn some technical terms and final exam and all the things. So that kind of brought me a little bit deeper, but still, I pursued graphic design. I went into working for newspapers. So I went into journalism from still a visual storytelling, but just from graphically.
Okay.
And so I pursued that, but I was still taking photos because I enjoyed it. Um, so Howard University brought me to DC. Graphic design had me kind of traveling a little bit to different cities. And then I came back to DC after leaving New Jersey, working at a newspaper there. Worked for military newspaper, Stars and Stripes here in
Okay.
DC.
Yeah. Yeah.
hmm And then left there to work at the Washington Post in sports. Actually, I
Oh,
worked in
nice.
sports. Um, I was I worked in sports during the time that it was Michael Wilbon and Tony
Yeah.
Kornheiser.
Oh, yeah.
They worked back there, and actually, I saw the birth of their show in the newsroom because they would come in with their banter in the newsroom and just kind of go back and forth. And while I was there, they said, "Oh, we're gonna do this show on ESPN." So that was like the I saw that like form right in the newsroom. But I left the Washington Post to go to USA Today, and USA Today
Okay.
was the last paper that I worked for. Again, I'm still doing photography for fun, you know. Um, I worked for USA Today. I think it was like 7 years, and then I got laid
Mhm.
off.
Okay.
And from there, I was like, you know what? I'm going to step out on faith, and I'm going to do this thing that I love to do. At the time, I was teaching when I was at USA Today. I was teaching as an adjunct professor at University of Maryland, College Park. I was teaching a newspaper design class in school communications, and I did a workshop at Howard while I was, doing this class for Maryland. And the chair at the time sat in on my workshop. And after the workshop, he asked me to teach at Howard. And so for me, I was like, oh, I'm coming home. Like, oh, yeah.
Oh
So
yeah.
I left Maryland to teach at Howard and, start doing that. And so when I got laid off from USA Today, I was like, you know what? So I started doing photography. And what I discovered is because honestly, Mitch, like my concern was, okay, I need to do work that is gonna bring in consistent money that I'll
Hmm.
be able to survive. Um, and so, there's kind of a scary kind of, in terms of doing it scared. That was another doing it scared because I was like, I don't know if this is gonna work. But honestly, I had the luxury of a package from a layoff. So I knew I
Okay.
had like a cushion to fall back on. Um, and I just went out there. But what I discovered is when I had the time now, then the work would come. And I started to share my work online. One thing I would say, like anybody considering this, community is key. And for me, I found community, and community helped me to navigate and get into this industry. I joined this organization called NPPA,
Yeah.
Newspaper Photographers, and that was my first organization that I joined. And in that, I was able to go to workshops. I was able to do portfolio reviews, all the things that helped me to kind of get out there, to meet editors, creative directors, share the work, build relationships. And that's how I started to get work. And I started to work within photojournalism um, because I got a call from an agency asking me if I was interested in working with them.
As you're talking about your formal education in graphic design and your work in the field with different entities, newspapers in graphic design, and how then you moved into photography from a career perspective, it reminds me of shooting sports so heavily. Like anything, you can get a little burnt out on
Hmm.
things, and I very much adopted and went just all in on wildlife photography
Mm,
around the world. And since street photography, portraiture, etc. And the reason I mention that is I find that even though each of those I mentioned are different genres, I feel like that all of them help kind of inform the other ones in terms of
hmm.
composition, light,
Yes.
finding a moment. And when you're talking about graphic design, obviously graphic design is not strictly photography, but an understanding of color and balance in a
Hmm.
composition, because it can be a graphic image composition. It doesn't have to be a photograph. Have you found that whether it's your graphic design training or things you photograph other than editorial and portraits, that it all kind of works together to kind of
It
freshen and
does.
inform all of them?
It does. It definitely does. For me, I think that was a strength coming in, that background in graphic design that did give me, because when I'm photographing, I see composition, I look at balance, those things. I look at like color. Also, I think in working in the journalism space and graphic design and layout and everything, my mind also goes to how someone enters a page or image visually.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is their eye going to be drawn to? Like, how am I leading? What do I want them to see first? Or what am I leading them into? And I realized, once I stepped back, and I realized in one of my first exhibitions with Leica, And my very first exhibition I had with Leica was at their LA gallery. And so I remember like being there and walking some people through to talk about the work. And I stepped back and I noticed that a lot of my work, I could see like my graphic design kind of eye and training, in that. And even in some of the images, I realized I worked with a lot of like negative space
Hmm.
in that, and realizing that my point in doing that was so that people, when they view the image, that it feels like they could come in and have a conversation, with that piece. And so for me, that negative space was that space for someone to interact, with the image, to see themselves next to, this person who's featured in this portrait. And that definitely came from that graphic design training. So I think it did give me a different perspective, but it also works really, really well into bringing in those other elements into creating these images.
Yeah, no, that makes, I mean, that makes perfect sense to me. And you mentioned the Los Angeles Leica Gallery, and Paris Chong is pretty
Yes, love
awesome. And
Paris.
yeah, she's great. She's been on the podcast, and yeah, she's just so talented and such a warm
Hmm.
person. That space in LA is such a great gallery space. It's
Oh, it
so
is.
open,
It's
and the light
beautiful.
is gorgeous. Yeah,
Yeah, it's beautiful.
yeah.
I mean, there's no better place to like in terms of my, first showing or whatever, to have it there. I was like, oh my God, wow, this is amazing. Like this space is incredible. And
Yeah.
yeah, so it was like a really good space to have that first feature of the work. And, I also love this DC, the DC gallery.
Hmm.
I've shown there twice. And then the Boston gallery is amazing too.
Okay.
I've shown there in Bellevue, Washington as well. I mean, they all have their own character
Hmm.
to it, which is like really cool to see like how each of those spaces, like what the character is, and then how the images show, within those spaces. So they do an excellent job in each of these galleries that are a part of the stores.
And
So it
it's a credit to them that, real estate obviously is expensive, especially in major cities,
mhm.
and I think it's a credit to them that they choose to invest in showing work,
Yeah,
because it's not
yeah,
just, well, it's not just a camera showroom. They
right.
actually have spaces that are dedicated to
Yeah,
shows, which is wonderful.
yeah, yeah. No, I love that part of it. I also love the programming that they do with Academy,
Mhm.
where you can actually, and I've taught, classes with the Academy as well, and will continue to. But I love being able to have the opportunity to um, take a master class or do a workshop with a photographer that I really like enjoy their work, and I want
Mhm.
to kind of pull the curtain back and see how they approach things, and what kind of guidance and tips they can give. So that's another thing that's like really cool, that it, like you said, it's not just a store that's selling camera equipment, but also you have this, and again, it goes back to community. You have these spaces that encourage community, that will bring people together, um, to not only take in this work, but to also make connections and build. Like we saw each other at Matthew Baton's book signing that was
Mhm.
at the DC gallery. So, and I've met plenty of people when I go to, some of the shows and classes and things that I've kept in touch with. So,
You mentioned taking classes and continuing to evolve the way you see things, and we all can have the same camera, literally the same
mhm.
camera, but the images that you take or I take or the next person takes can be very different because it's
Yes.
not what's in the camera, it's what's between each of our ears and the
Hmm.
way we see things. And I have a lot of young photographers who will approach me, and a lot of them are maybe they're taking programs in high school, or maybe they've graduated college with a degree in something having to do with photography or related visual arts. And they're ambitious. They've gotten maybe their first job, but they're already trying to think about job number five, even though they just got their first job. And what I say to them when I'm asked is taking a competent, properly exposed picture is like a requirement. People aren't going
Hmm.
to hire you unless you're taking school pictures, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they're not going to pay you well and want to bring your vision forward unless you have a unique vision. So I
Hmm.
encourage people, don't copy somebody, learn
Hmm.
from everybody, but then figure
Hmm.
out what pieces and parts are your style. It's like being a jazz musician. You're not just playing the straight notes, you're taking them as a rough guideline, but then you're
Hmm.
taking the music the way you want to express yourself. And I think if I look at the photographers out there that sort of separate themselves, it's not about, and I'm going to beat up a little on social media here, it's not just who put what filters on a picture. It's not about that. It's who actually created that photo in a way that people will stop scrolling, will spend
Hmm.
a moment. They won't just hit like and move on. They'll look at it and say, I've seen probably 100 pictures of that person or that place or that thing,
Hmm.
but I don't know I've ever seen it photographed like that. You know,
Right.
so what are your thoughts, either for yourself or just
Hmm.
in the industry, about differentiating yourself? Because I think that's
Yeah.
hugely important.
It's huge. I agree. I agree with you. It's huge. And that's great advice you gave the photographers, or you're giving the photographers when they come to you, is you do have to find your voice in the sea of all these other voices. And again, it'll be the same subject matter, but there's a different way that we could be looking at the same thing, Mitch, and you see it a different way than I do. Because a lot of times our vision comes from our background, our upbringing, just different factors in our life in terms of what we gravitate to or how we see things. And so, again, social media, there's like a sea of pretty pictures, everything. What stands out to me is those things where I really feel something, whether it's sadness, happiness, whatever emotion that evokes some type of emotion. And for me, I can tell if someone spent time with this person in front of their camera, or if it was just like a spray, or
Mm-hmm.
just kind of something very, very quick without any kind of conversation or anything. um and maybe it's because I gravitate to those kind of in between moments that, just don't scream at you, but it's the little subtle things that I think are really powerful when I'm looking at or receiving an image. So I would say, like, going back to, um, maybe younger photographers or people who are looking to share their work online where there's like so much, is to really come from it from a place of your voice, your perspective, your background. um I teach a class. I teach at Howard as an adjunct. And one thing I encourage my students to do is to start where they are, like even within your family, your community, those things that are closest to you, because those are things that are going to make you're going to stand out among someone else who just tries to come into your community and who may not have a connection. You're going to be able to tell a difference in the images that come from someone who is connected within that, or took the time to make a connection, versus someone who, I talk about this when I talk about journalism and photojournalism is helicopter journalism.
Yes.
So you could tell the difference if someone is like a helicopter journalist who just comes in during these times of, when things are on fire and everything versus like building this rapport or trust or relationship with a community where you're able to show like a multifaceted, story of that community, or it comes from a different perspective instead of this just kind of evasive um kind of viewpoint. So I think the key is to lean into who you are, and who you are is different from who I am. Who you are is different from who Mitch is. So that's the thing that's going to help you to stand out from Mitch, from myself, even when we're looking at the same thing.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that really has struck me looking at your editorial photography is, what seems to me it's the ability to come upon a scene where there is a lot going on. There's different people and situations, and you are, very quickly sussing out compositions within that overall scene, and
Hmm.
then you're honing in on them, and then your composition, and then the just the photography skill comes in to capture those images. And I think that a lot of times if a person is coming onto a scene where maybe there's a speaker giving a talk amongst other people or a crowd of people, it can seem so overwhelming. Where do I even start? Where do I even look? There's got to be 10 different pictures here, but things are moving too fast. And so, in looking at your work, I know how difficult it can be to locate not just a subject, but a subject that helps tell that story within
Hmm.
that scene. You know, I was in New York City for an unrelated event, and as I was walking to the train station, I look up and suddenly I realized I was in the middle of that No Kings March. And I thought,
Oh
I didn't even know
wow.
this was
Yeah.
going on, but I had my
Yeah.
camera, and
Yeah.
I kind of went into photojournalist mode, and I just
Uh-huh.
walked in the middle against the
Yeah.
flow of people. And I
Yeah.
was getting these pictures, and I made a couple images that I really liked. One of which was several adults with signs, and they were there to
Hmm.
express how they felt. But then in the
Hmm.
midst of this, there was a little kid with a lollipop, and it was
Love
like
it. Yeah.
two completely different
Yeah.
experiences in that
Right.
one scene. So, for you, when you're entering a scene that has a lot going on, what's the computer like in
Yeah.
Cheriss's
Oh my
mind?
God.
What's the algorithm, to use that word, in
Yeah.
your brain, where you're like, image to the left, image to the right, image above, like
Yeah.
what's the voices going on in your head in those kind of
Yeah.
high density moments?
Yeah. And you're right. It's like, it's so much going on in those, in those places and spaces. Like if you're at a rally, um, it depends. Like if I'm on assignment, um, then it's like I'm doing overview of, the scene, and then, if anything jumps out at me or any people, or, if I okay, so if I'm on assignment, I'll do that first. And my goal is to get a good representation of what's going on and what's there. I'll do that first, and then I'll slow down and see the kid with the lollipop or something that's happening in the midst of, I especially like things that are when things are like kind of going fast and
Mm-hmm.
kind of chaotic, and things that you find some silent moment or something. So the kid with the lollipop is a great example. And I may see that. And then it depends on the moment, but maybe with something like that, then I'm like, okay, like what other kids are here?
Mm-hmm.
And what are they doing? Are they, with their lollipops and toys, or are they holding signs? What are the kids? So then it becomes a thing of that becomes a story, within that is, what is it from the kid perspective of, what's going on here. And in those situations, sometimes you have kids who are like all in and a part of it. And then sometimes you see kids who are, just being a kid and, doing their thing. For me, it's about if I'm on assignment, again, I'm getting what's needed to tell that story of, that particular event. And then I'm slowing down to look for those kind of sub stories within
Hmm.
that. Um, if I am not on assignment and I'm just doing something like as a personal project or on my own, then I'm not doing this quick overview, type of thing. I'm actually like slowing down and looking for those stories first to focus on and do that. Um and you did something that when you go through, like when I went through the conflict training and all the things, like um they tell us certain things like you shouldn't do, and we always as photographers, like we go against that.
Hmm.
And that's a lot of times where you are able to connect to the most powerful images. Like, some of my most like kind of favorite images, my conflict training would have said, don't get in the middle of that circle. Like you need to be on the outside of the circle, because if the crowd collapses, then you're in the center of this and you can get crushed and all the things. But when you're in the heat of this moment and you're just like feeling things and like, oh, then it's like, okay, I'm gonna stand in the middle of the circle, and then the most amazing things happen, within that. And I'm not saying this to tell people like you should always go against what,
Yeah.
is safe. But it's like I think you have to just be aware, have that situational awareness in things. Please be safe, in that, be out there. But to lean into where you may be led to, see these stories, where you may be led to see the kid with the lollipop, those things that are happening kind of underneath the surface. And I think that's when your work will stand out from everything else that's going to be out there, because they're going to be the surface. So look for those perspectives that may be kind of off center and happening on the side or in the background, even. So a lot of it is in the algorithm of things, behind the scenes, is to just watch, observe, listen. I think some of the most powerful images are created when you listen first, because in listening first, that's going to connect you with those things that maybe someone else is not paying attention to because they're over here with all the noise and the chaos.
Yeah, there I was with my Leica Deluxe 8, which is not like a real photojournalism camera. It's a perfectly good camera, but
Hmm.
had I thought I was going to be shooting something like that, but I literally I lived at a 24 millimeter f8 640th
Mm.
of a second, and I wanted to be like all Bruce Gilden. I wanted to get the faces in sharp focus, and and all that. So that leads me to a question that if I don't ask, I will definitely get asked. So I'll beat it to the punch, as it were. When you
Mm.
go out for assignment, what is your toolkit from a lens perspective generally consist of? I know it can vary for
Hmm.
very
Hmm.
specific uses, but if you're
Yeah.
not sure exactly what you're going to get, some portraits, some bigger picture environmental stuff,
Right.
what
Right.
do you kind of head out to the place with in your bag?
Yeah. So some days it looks like um M11P. Some days it's M11P and an M11P with a 50. millimeter lens and the 28 are the
Okay.
two lenses that I kind of go back and forth with. But honestly, I mostly use the 50 with that one. And so for my wide, then I think about, okay, I need something for wide shots. Then it's either a Q3 with the fixed 28,
Hmm.
or it's the SL2 with the 24 to 70 or 24 to 90.
Hmm.
Um, if it's photojournalism, then I'm looking at Q3 with fixed 28, SL2 with either the 70 to 200 or 100 to 400. And I'm usually good with that. I have something where I have reach, with the zoom, and then I have something where I can, get wide, wide shots. Sometimes it looks like a 24 prime on the M, or a 20, like the 21 was like really beautiful in getting some clean wide shots without distortion on the edges. Um, I did. I borrowed that lens, um, one time to do some things, and I was like really amazed how, with it being so wide, how it didn't really distort, which I really enjoyed. So yeah, my toolkit is, depending on the day, it's photojournalism is normally having something wide and then having a zoom.
So are
Um,
you,
mhm.
I was going to ask, are you a camera with you pretty much all the time person, or are you more of when I'm going to work, of course I have my gear, but when I'm not, quote, at work, I'm going to leave the camera at home. I'll use my phone if I actually see something that I really
Yeah.
want to make a picture of.
It just kind of depends on what it is. Like if I'm going somewhere and it's something I'm like off the clock and I'm personally doing as fun, I may just take like a, the Q3 or the M with me just in case I feel like, I'm going to do something or see something.
Mhm.
I used to be one who always had a camera with me, but not so much these days. Um, I can remember in the very beginning, I was that person that always had a camera with me. And then I remember this was like before I was doing photojournalism work, and I had done this, I did a wedding. Um I did a wedding for someone, and they were celebrity, and always having that camera with me. I just remember like they were having a Christmas party at their home, and they're like, "Oh, I want to invite you to our Christmas party or whatever." Okay, cool.
Bring your
And you can
camera.
bring your camera if you. And I was like, I can. So I mean, are you hiring me to, or so I was like, okay. So I started to get hip to that kind of thing of, okay, so some of these invitations are coming because they know I always have my camera, and they'll get some photos, out of the invitation. So when I said that, like, oh, would you like to hire me to do that? And they were like, no, just, if you bring your camera. I was like, okay, cool. Guess what? I came to the holiday party and I left my camera at home.
Right.
And when I came, they were like, "Oh, you didn't bring your camera." I was like, "No, I'm off the clock. Thank you for the invitation."
Right. It'd be like if
Yeah.
you had you have a friend who's a dentist and you invite him to come over and you say, "Oh, by the way, can you bring your drill and and some cleaning tools?"
Right. While you're here,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
This,
It's interesting. I didn't realize this, and maybe shame on me, but I didn't realize that there was a time, not in the very, very distant past, where photography was not considered art.
yeah.
Paintings, drawings, etchings, et cetera, art, but
Hmm.
not photography, no matter how
Yeah.
beautiful the photography was. And then I also, and again, shame on me, but I've really gone down the rabbit hole to educate myself about how commercial photographers, people like Avedon and others, were not considered in a way as serious as a
Hmm.
photographer as people like Cartier-Bresson and others. And it's just interesting to me. I didn't also realize that Elton John was one of the early, most noteworthy collectors of photography. And it's just fascinating to me because I'm talking about like the 1950s, and we were only about to be in a new year here, 2025, 2026. It's not that long. And while
Yeah.
there's obviously all sorts of societal issues and things that have changed for the better and worse in 75 years, from a
Hmm.
photography standpoint, where photography is now, I'm trying to figure out, is it in a better place, a worse place, or just a different place than it was then? Because it's
Hmm.
everywhere. But I could make the argument that it's less valued now than ever, even though it's more prevalent than ever. I know that's a lot, but what are your thoughts on that entire doctoral dissertation?
No, it's true in terms of like looking at it from an art standpoint. Um, I what I would say is it's in a different place to me. I wouldn't say in some cases it's better, but I would say overall it's just in a different place. Um, I'm currently in a group exhibition that it opened up during Art Basel in Miami. And so it's it was staying up for a month and they actually I got a note that they're extending it. So
Oh,
it'll,
good.
be into the new year. Like I think through January now. Um, but in that, I think I within that show, I'm trying to think. I'm maybe there was one other photograph, but I know like no, I take that. There were a group of so there were a group of photos of Basquiat that were part of that show. But other than that, like I was the only other like photography piece, within
Okay.
that. And when I was there for the opening reception, a lot of what people were saying was, they were coming in closer to look at it and they were like, is this a photo or is it a painting? Like, I think a lot like people are used to in that art space not really seeing photography, with the other kind of mediums of painting and
Mm-hmm.
collage and, different things like that. So I think people are still kind of I don't want to say getting used to it because I don't know if they're getting used to it, but it's still kind of something foreign within the art space, I would say, unless you are specifically doing a photography exhibition,
Mm-hmm.
art wise. But you're right on that. I think it's again, I'll say it's different. And one thing that is kind of challenging it that I think people are scared about is AI,
Mm-hmm.
within the space now. So you know, in addition to it not being considered, art in some spaces, now we have AI to contend with, which is, can start to dumb down the appreciation, of it, I think, because some people are getting used to doing things who aren't artists, using AI to create imagery that is supposed to replicate what a true from camera portrait, is. So I think that's something that is, becoming a challenge within that space. Because now the question is people are asking like, is that AI or is it real? You know?
Yeah.
That becomes, I'm sure you've gone through that too, where people like they question like, is that AI? So that's the thing now that I think we're contending with within that space.
When I grew up, AI was Allen Iverson, and he was playing for the 76ers.
Right, right,
That was my AI
right.
back in the day. Yeah, it's interesting, and I have no issue if a person shows their work and they say, this is a photo illustration. I have no issue with that.
Yes, yes, yes,
And be proud of what you're creating, and most people
yes.
you should be proud of what you're creating. Just
Right,
say what it is,
correct.
or what it's not, and then move on, let it stand on its own. But to leave things to the viewer's interpretation, I think it doesn't help differentiate photo
Mm-hmm.
illustration versus AI versus true content from the camera. And that does bring in the whole conversation. Even before AI, the expression was is that real or was that photoshopped? that was
Right,
that was that was
right.
a whole thing. It is a
Yeah,
whole thing.
yeah.
And with me working in the editorial world, I can crop an image, and
Mm-hmm.
somebody might say, well, by cropping it, that's not what you
Mm-hmm.
saw. That's not what the camera made. And, if we come into a concert, or we come into a large crowd, and I decide that I'm going to photograph these six people on the left, not these four people on the right. Well, I'm now
Mm-hmm.
making a decision of what was, in quotes, there, but yet both of
Mm-hmm.
those groups were there. So,
Mm-hmm.
and it's sort of like an endless conversation you could have.
Right.
But yeah, I just think that, say what it is. And then, you have all these, incredible capabilities, things like content aware. Well, there was a
Yeah.
twig in front of the lion, so now it took the twig away. Well, there was a twig there. You can,
Yeah.
it's such a rabbit
Yeah.
hole. But as much as we go down that rabbit hole, or we can go down it, I think it really starts with composition, and it starts
Yeah.
with identifying subjects. And when someone shows you a photo and says, what do you think? I'm really interested in your opinion. And maybe the scene is jumbled, maybe there's just a bunch of stuff going on. Asking that person, in this photo, what was the subject that attracted you? So that you can
Mm-hmm.
understand what the picture taker's mindset was, and then look
Mm-hmm.
at what they produced, and then maybe give them advice to have a bigger connection from what they wanted to compose and what they wanted to show, and kind of what they ended up with, because they may just not have the skills. They may not have known, zoom with your feet, get closer,
Mm-hmm.
you know
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
that's a lovely picture of your daughter, but she has a pole coming out of the top of her head. Maybe move left or
Mm-hmm.
right. It's like, it gets back to fundamentals that are probably the same as they've been for a really long time. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that, if people look at your work and the work of others, not to copy it, but just
Mm-hmm.
to learn from it,
Yeah.
I think the world of photography has just so many leaps and bounds in a positive sense ahead of it. I really do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree. And I agree also with, and that's what I was saying earlier in terms of finding your voice and not doing it just like this person. Um I like to, like, I'm inspired, by other work, and I'll follow, other work and see what people are doing. Like, wow, that was like really good how they did that, or I love the perspective on that. And that to me is serves as an inspiration. I definitely don't want to say I like that and I want to recreate, like I want to do it exactly, like that. Like I want it to be unique to my voice and my perspective and how I see. Um, so I would say that to other photographers is find your voice in that. Don't try to just do every single thing like, someone whose work you admire, but find your way and your voice, within that. Um, if they are one thing that one of my mentors, Fred Watkins, said to me a long time ago that still sticks with me is If they go left, you go right, because everybody on the left is going to have the same thing and you're going to have something different on the right.
That's it's incredibly helpful advice. Cheriss, I also want to just thank you for your
Mm,
generosity of time because I know you're busy and you have a lot going on, as you should, because your work is beautiful. And
thank you. I
I
appreciate
really,
that.
really have such an appreciation for it. I know that listeners are going to want to check out things you have going on. Where are some good places online or otherwise to keep up with what you're doing and what you've done and just kind of follow your work?
Okay. I would say IRL in real life. Right now through January, if you're in Miami, the More Miami, I have a piece that's in a group exhibition curated by the Bishop Gallery. Um, so check that out if you're in the area through January. And also in real life, I have three pieces that are at the Bishop Gallery, which is in Brooklyn, New York. And I think that one is going to be up through, I think it's February. I think it's up until February. But I will definitely post that on my social, my social channels, Instagram and um, mostly Instagram,
Okay.
LinkedIn. But you can always, like, if you want to see like what I'm working on or where I may be showing some things, I definitely share it on Instagram, Threads, LinkedIn. I have a website as well, which is my first and last name.com, cherissmay.com, CHERISSMAY.com. So I also post news on there as well. And I think this year, actually, Mitch, I'm going to start a newsletter and start doing a newsletter
Nice.
because I hadn't done that, but then I'll have people who will ask me, if I do have something, I have a mailing list. They would love to like kind of keep up and stay in touch, with what I'm doing. So I was like, you know what? I think I'm gonna do that for the in the new year.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, I again, I want to thank you, and I want to remind our listeners that we publish a brand new episode on the 1st and 15th of every month. You can check out what I have going on as well. You can check out Instagram at Mitch Stringer Images online, mitchstringerimages.com for the latest and greatest. I would say probably Instagram's the best way to see the things I have going on. And as I always offer, feel free to DM with questions, whether it's gear related or travel related for photography, any of those kind of things. Feel free. It definitely had a lot of listeners reach out, and I'm always happy to get those inquiries and get back to everybody. Until next time, I wish you great light. I wish you great shooting, and we'll talk again soon.